This is the story of an ambitious journey of a genius engineer named Peter Sidenius. Coming from a conservative religious family, he leaves his hometown to pursue big dreams in Copenhagen. With revolutionary ideas about energy and engineering, Peter strives for success, but his ambition clashes with arrogance and ego, which slowly become his greatest enemies. In the midst of his struggle, he also faces dilemmas of love and identity that shake his life. Will his genius lead him to happiness, or will it destroy everything? This film offers strong emotional drama, beautiful cinematography, and a thought-provoking story, a must-watch. Enjoy the movie, and don't forget to subscribe to Orion Storyline so you don't miss more inspiring films in the future. This man is named Peter. He is the son of a poor pastor in a small village in Denmark. That morning, Peter received a letter from a prestigious university in Copenhagen stating that he had won a scholarship to study architecture. To be closer to campus, Peter decided to move to Copenhagen. When he was about to leave, his father gave him a watch while advising him to stand firm in his principles and not be influenced by the wealthy people in Copenhagen. His father said that being rich was fine, but he should not become greedy. Upon hearing his father's advice, Peter arrogantly replied that he didn't care even if he had to be greedy. All he wanted was to become rich because he was fed up with living in poverty. His father, furious, slapped him and threw him out of the house. After a long journey, Peter finally arrived in Copenhagen. He rented a small apartment in a poor neighborhood. To pay the rent and cover his daily needs, Peter applied for a job as a dishwasher at a luxury restaurant. One evening while working, he noticed a waitress smiling at him. Seeing this, Peter realized that she must have liked him. After work, Peter tried to approach her and asked her to walk home together. Weeks passed, and Peter began mastering his studies on campus. Every day after class, he focused on creating his grand design, a wind power plant. Peter was confident that one day, he would be able to bring his design to life. One evening after work, Peter spontaneously decided to dine at another restaurant. He hoped that by eating there, he could make friends with wealthy people. Summoning his courage, Peter tried to start a conversation with a guest named Ivan. Peter told Ivan that he was currently working on a wind power plant design. Even though he was still a student, Peter confidently guaranteed that his design would be successful. Unfortunately, Ivan was not interested at all. Days passed, and on Christmas Eve, since he had no money, Peter went to his girlfriend's house, the waitress from the restaurant. In reality, Peter was only dating her so that he could eat for free every day. That night, after finishing his meal, Peter shared his plans and his experience meeting Ivan. He then asked to borrow money to dine at the same restaurant again, convinced that if he met Ivan once more, he could persuade him to become an investor. Because she was deeply in love, the waitress willingly lent Peter the money. The next day at the restaurant, Peter met Ivan again. Unlike their first encounter, this time Ivan welcomed him warmly. Ivan said that he hadn't believed Peter was a university student at first, so he had done some research on him. After a long conversation, Ivan finally invited Peter to his house the next day, saying that if his father heard Peter's brilliant idea, he might also be interested in investing. Hearing the invitation, Peter was overjoyed. He never imagined that a poor pastor's son like him would be invited to a nobleman's house. After Ivan left, Peter, wanting to appear more convincing the next day, decided to trick a clothing vendor to get luxurious clothes for free. He pretended that he had left his wallet at the hotel and promised to return later to pay. Believing that Peter was a wealthy man, the vendor trusted him, but Peter never returned. The next day, Peter was warmly welcomed by Ivan's family. Even Ivan's uncle called him fortunate man because Peter had a brilliant mind despite being born into a poor family. During lunch, Peter once again explained his design to Ivan's father. Seeing the young man's enthusiasm, Ivan's father immediately agreed to become an investor. However, since Peter's design was a massive project, it first needed approval from the head of the Danish engineers community, Professor Berregraf. Only after that could the Danish government authorize the construction of the project. Following Ivan's father's advice, the next day, Peter met with Professor Beregraf. When the professor heard Peter's explanation, he was amazed. Never in his life had he met a young man with such a brilliant idea for a wind power plant design. The professor then asked Peter to return the following week, explaining that before approving the project, he needed to present it to the other community members. That afternoon, Peter shared his conversation with Professor Beregraf with Ivan. To celebrate their progress, Ivan invited Peter to dine at a luxurious restaurant. However, to Peter's surprise, the restaurant Ivan referred to was the same one where he worked as a dishwasher. While there, they also encountered Ivan's older sister, Jacobe, who was dining with her fiancé. They all engaged in a long conversation, during which Peter learned that Jacobe would one day be the main heir to their family's wealth. Not long after, Peter's girlfriend, the waitress, came to take their order. Afraid of being exposed as someone dating a mere waitress, Peter quickly went to the kitchen and broke up with her. Heartbroken, the waitress was left speechless. A week later, Peter returned to meet Professor Beregraf. However, unlike the previous week, this time the professor rejected Peter's design. The professor felt that Peter was not yet worthy of undertaking such a grand project because he was still too young and had not graduated from university. He stated that he could help Peter bring his project to life, but only on the condition that his name would be credited as the inventor of the design. Hearing this, Peter was deeply disappointed. He could not understand how a great professor could have such a devious idea to steal his project. Before leaving, Peter angrily hurled harsh words at him. That afternoon, Peter told Ivan about what had happened with the professor. As a friend, Ivan tried to console him, saying that perhaps Professor Beregraf did not respect Peter because he lacked experience. Ivan then suggested that Peter work with his uncle, an engineer in Austria, to gain experience. Ivan believed that once Peter returned, Professor Beregraf would take him more seriously. Hearing this suggestion, Peter agreed. Day by day, Peter started visiting Ivan's house more frequently, not to discuss his project, but to get closer to Jacobe. Peter had devised a plan to make Jacobe fall in love with him and leave her fiancé. He thought that if his plan to work in Austria failed, marrying Jacobe would still secure his future. After days of courting Jacobe, Peter's plan finally worked. Jacobe began to show interest in him. One afternoon, Ivan's family invited Peter for a carriage ride. Along the way, Peter claimed that, according to research, humans could actually run faster than horses. To prove his theory, Peter jumped off the carriage and sprinted as fast as he could toward the villa. Everyone was amazed, except for Jacobe, who knew that Peter was only doing it to impress her. Upon arriving at the villa, without saying a word, Jacobe immediately went inside. Seeing an opportunity, Peter quickly followed her and confessed his feelings. Hearing Peter's words, Jacobe could no longer hold back her emotions. Crying, she admitted that she loved Peter too. Months passed, and Peter had been working in Austria with Ivan's uncle. Almost every day, he received love letters from Jacobe. Since the incident at the villa, Jacobe had called off her engagement and chosen to be with Peter. However, since Peter had never truly loved Jacobe from the start, he never responded to her letters. A month later, Peter finally returned to Copenhagen and got engaged to Jacobe. At the engagement party, Jacobe's father announced that his business associates wanted to hear about Peter's design. If they found it promising, they would also invest in the project. Overjoyed, Peter felt that his dream of becoming a wealthy man was about to come true. That afternoon, when Peter returned home, his landlord handed him a letter from his mother. In the letter, she wrote that she was now living near his apartment. Peter was shocked and immediately rushed to see her. When they met, his mother told him that a few months ago, Peter's father had passed away. She had been forced to move because their house in the village had been taken over by the new pastor. His mother then gave him the watch that his father had once given him. Just like his father, she also advised Peter not to become a greedy rich man. From his appearance alone, she could tell that Peter had changed. He had become an ambitious man who would do anything to succeed. Hearing this, Peter became annoyed. He did not like his mother interfering in his life. Without saying a word, he left the watch behind and walked away. The next morning, at the office, Peter confidently presented his design to Jacobe's father's business associates. He did not care about what his mother had said the day before. To him, the success of his project was far more important. Upon hearing Peter's proposal, everyone was impressed and willing to invest. However, they had one condition. Peter had to apologize to Professor Beregraf first. Not long after, Professor Beregraf arrived. Seeing the man who had nearly stolen his idea, Peter was furious. He could not believe that these people were choosing to side with that deceitful professor. Firmly, Peter refused to apologize and instead chose to walk away, taking all of his ideas with him. That afternoon, Peter confided in Jacobe about what had happened at her father's office that morning. However, instead of comforting him, Jacobe also urged Peter to apologize. She said that maybe Peter's pride was still too high, but this was simply how the lives of the wealthy worked. Those with lower social status had to apologize to those of higher status, even if they were not in the wrong. If Peter resisted, he would be shunned by other wealthy people. Peter fell silent. A few days later, Peter went to visit his older brother, who was a pastor on the outskirts of Copenhagen. He went there because his brother had sent him a letter asking him to come. When Peter arrived, his brother informed him that their mother had just passed away the day before. He also handed Peter a letter and a package from their mother. Hearing this news, Peter was shocked. Even though he had always seemed indifferent to his family, deep down, he truly loved his parents. His brother then explained that their mother's funeral would take place in their old village the next day. If Peter was not too busy, he hoped that his younger brother would be the one to accompany their mother's body on its final journey. That night, as he lay in his room, Peter kept thinking about his brother's request. Throughout his life in Copenhagen, he had always moved forward without hesitation. But this time, his feelings were in turmoil. Peter then read the letter from his mother. In it, she urged him to return to being the obedient and devout son he once was. She did not want his temporary greed to destroy his life in the future. Reading the letter, Peter was deeply shaken. He finally realized that he had become a despicable man who had used many people for his own gain. After a night of reflection, the next morning, Peter decided to set aside time to accompany his mother's body. On the ship, when Peter opened the package from his mother, he found that it contained the watch his father had given him. The next morning, upon arriving in the village, Peter's mother was laid to rest. After the funeral, Peter stopped by his childhood home and spoke with the pastor who had replaced his late father. During their conversation, the pastor's daughter, Inge, came out carrying food. Seeing Inge's beauty, Peter was mesmerized. He had initially planned to leave immediately, but instead, he asked for permission to stay the night at the pastor's house. That afternoon, Peter tried to get close to Inge, but knowing that Peter was already engaged, she gently rejected him. Instead of realizing his mistake and stopping, that night, Peter found himself thinking about Inge even more. All his life, Peter had approached women only to take advantage of them. But when he looked at Inge, there was not a single thought of exploitation. His love for her was genuine. The next morning, upon returning to Copenhagen, Peter met with Jacobe and, without any hesitation, immediately asked to break off their engagement. He honestly admitted that he had never loved her. Hearing this, Jacobe was devastated. Crying, she begged Peter not to leave her. But her pleas were in vain. Peter was determined to end their relationship. 2 days later, Peter went to the office of one of Jacobe's father's business associates to sell his design. However, despite how impressive his project was, the investor refused, simply because Peter was no longer engaged to Jacobe. 4 days, he continued trying to pitch his idea to other investors, but the response was always the same. Without the social status that came from Jacobe's family, Peter was just another poor man in their eyes. Years passed, and Peter's life had completely changed. Now, he lived in a modest house in a village. He had also married Inge and had 3 children. There was no longer Peter, the lucky man. There was only Peter, the unemployed man. Ever since breaking up with Lykke-Per, not a single person in the city was willing to hire Peter. Even as a dishwasher, he was rejected. People were afraid that if they hired him, all of Lykke-Per's family connections in the government would be furious and shut down their businesses. All this time, it was Inge's father who had been supporting Peter's family with his salary from managing the church. Nearly every day, Peter's only activity was going to the storage room and creating new designs. Designs that he knew he would never be able to bring to life. One night, Peter confided in Inge. He was growing tired of his life. He used to be a lucky man who could get anything he wanted with ease. But now he felt like nothing more than a parasite who was only burdening his family. Peter told Inge that if one day she met a man who was far better than him, she had his permission to leave. Hearing her husband's words, Inge tried to comfort him. The next day, Peter's family celebrated their child's birthday. At the simple party, one of Inge's childhood friends came. Seeing how much attention this man paid to his wife, Peter immediately knew that he must have feelings for Inge. But even though his heart ached and felt shattered, Peter remained silent. He knew that this man was far more deserving of making Inge happy. He had a stable job and a nice house, completely different from Peter, who was just an unemployed man. After gathering his resolve, Peter finally decided to leave his family. Meanwhile, in the city of Copenhagen, Lykke-Per was seen taking photos with poor orphan children. Ever since parting ways with Peter, Lykke-Per had decided not to marry and wanted to become an independent woman. She had closed her heart to other men and dedicated herself to building a charity school for underprivileged children. Her goal in establishing the school was to ensure that poor children could receive a high-quality education and pursue their dreams as high as possible. Several years later, one day while teaching, Lykke-Per received a letter from Peter. In the letter, Peter informed her that he was now sick. If she did not mind, he wished to see her one last time. Feeling sorry for him, Lykke-Per immediately rushed to meet Peter. When she arrived, Peter hugged his former lover tightly, repeatedly apologizing. He told her that after reading about her charity school in the newspaper, his guilt resurfaced. He regretted ever being deceitful and using Lykke-Per just to advance his own plans, even though she had been incredibly kind and had loved him wholeheartedly. If permitted, Peter wanted to donate his designs to the charity school. He also handed her a small sum of money that he had managed to save. Peter's words deeply moved Lykke-Per. With sincerity, she told him that she had already forgiven him. After Lykke-Per left, Peter sat on a hill, reflecting on his fate. He realized that throughout his life, he had accumulated countless regrets. But among them, there was one regret that stood above all others. He regretted not listening to his parents' advice. It turned out that his father and mother had been right all along. Greed had destroyed his life. And so, the film came to an end. This film depicts a journey of ambition, pride, and self-discovery. Peter Sidenius is a symbol of someone with great intelligence and vision, but who is often hindered by arrogance and an inability to reconcile with his past. The film teaches that true success is not merely about material or intellectual achievements, but also about understanding oneself, appreciating the people around us, and accepting our weaknesses as part of life. Ultimately, A Fortunate Man conveys that fortune is not just about what we achieve, but about how we learn from failure, accept ourselves, and find happiness in the things that truly matter.